Welcome to what was supposed to be our midweek mailbag podcast, but very quickly turned into something else. My name is Jeremy Reisman. I am the producer of Rep Pride of Detroit. You can find me at Detroit Online. With me for our I guess we'll just call it a midweek emergency podcast, is managing editor of Pride of Detroit at Eric Schlitt on Twitter. Eric Schlitt is here, buddy. How we doing?
I tell you what, this is a heck of a way to kick off Movember, right?
Yeah, yes, it is Movember. We are raising money for the Alzheimer's Association. You can find links to donate in Twitch chat if you want to hit !donate or on the website prideofdetroit.com. But for now, let's put that aside because obviously huge news hit on Tuesday afternoon, about a couple hours before the trade deadline. The Detroit Lions have shipped TJ Hawkinson to, of all teams, the Minnesota Vikings, the division-leading Minnesota Vikings. The Lions get a Vikings second-round pick in return and a 2024 third-round pick, but they also sent a 2023 next year's fourth-round pick and a conditional 2024 fourth-round pick. So in essence, the Lions don't get any additional picks, but they bump up a couple spots in each round, essentially. Eric, tell me how I should feel.
I'll tell you what. 3 weeks ago, we floated the idea of Hockenson potentially being traded, just kind of off the cuff, saying that we didn't think he was part of the long-term future, or at least I suggested that. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Right.
And so I had said the way he's being used, the hierarchy at which they are deciding to deploy targets he was never that feature guy, right? The only time he was ever that feature guy was when they were down St. Brown and they were down Chark, and we haven't even seen Jameson yet. And they seem to have a preference, both coaching staff on front office, towards receivers as opposed to tight ends, which is a bit ironic with Dan Campbell being the former tight end.
Right.
But they prefer their tight ends to be more
two-way
balanced.
Yeah.
You got to be a really good blocker. They want you to be able to, they don't need their tight ends to be exceptional. They need them to be reliable. And that Hockenson had a big number attached to him, and he was going to have a big number attached to him. And they had engaged in potential contract extensions with him as well. And so I'm sure they started talking to him about contract extensions, and they started hearing those numbers, and then they started saying, well, what's his impact on the team? And it was a cost evaluation thing, and saying, geez, I don't know if he's part of the long-term future. You never really heard Dan Campbell overly praise Hockenson. He just kind of talked to him about him as being a big part of the offense, but not like this game-breaking style of player that, you get when he talks about like guys like St. Brown and whatnot. And so he just kind of, he was an important piece, but he was someone that the previous regime drafted very highly. He had $9.4 million guaranteed to him next year, which means it would have been really difficult to move on from him, next year as well, because of that contract once they got it, and that they would have been kind of stuck on that. 9.4 is a ton of money for a guy that maybe isn't going to be one of your top 3 featured targets. And right now, that's not how they value him. So yeah, we floated the idea that we put a poll out to fans and said, should the Lions be sellers? And if they are, this is probably the most likely person they're going to sell. And people said yes. And then we wrote an article, Mike wrote an article and said, this is probably what's going to happen with Hockenson. He's probably might draw a second based on the Hayden Hurst trade. This is probably what it's going to be. And people said, yes, we still want them to sell. And they've sold, and everything is, oh my gosh, they didn't get enough. And I get it. But the value, you're never going to get a first rounder. I don't care what Jeff Howe says, what his projection was with the Tampa Bay trade. I don't think it was realistic. Hockenson is a good player. Is he worth $9.4 million? Is he worth 13 that he's projected to get? Probably not.
Right.
If they were going to deal him, they could have dealt him in the offseason. Who knows if they would even got as much as they got right now. And so, yeah.
I think that last point that you made is the most salient, because if you were to ask Lions fans, should they extend TJ Hockenson, I think the majority of people would have said no, because of what you just said. Like, I'm not sure he's worth $13 million a year. And so if you've come to that conclusion that you think Hawkins, maybe you've had initial conversations with his agent, and it seems like that's the ballpark they're looking for. Well, this is basically the ideal time to trade him then, right? His value, he's coming off a pretty good game. His value, he's still got another year on his contract where he's under that $13 million by quite a bit. And listen, like this, there are things that are frustrating about this trade, no doubt. The fact that you aren't technically gaining any picks, that can be frustrating. I get it. But a second rounder is certainly going to be a lot better than a third rounder in the following year, and third rounder is better than a fourth rounder. Like, none of that is controversial to say, but doing it to a division rival, not getting any additional picks, I get why on the surface this is very frustrating to Lions fans. It especially when and also, I mean, you think about going into the year, right? You're like, wow, this team has DJ Chark. They're going to have Jameson Williams. They got Josh Reynolds back. They have DeAndre Swift. They have TJ Hockenson. Look at all these weapons have. And now Jameson Williams hasn't come back. TJ Hockenson is gone. DeAndre Swift is injured and not himself. And suddenly this arsenal of offensive weapons that you thought you had is just gone.
Okay. But look, I get it. But like, what is this team building for?
What,
right?
But I don't know. I don't have an answer for you, Eric. Like, it seems like I don't know where this team's. I don't know what this team's identity is anymore. They want to run the ball. Who's going to run the ball? They want to play defense. Who's playing defense? Like,
well, they're gonna probably have to draft someone that wants to run the ball. I guess or that can run the ball.
Here's what's frustrating to me. And I understand part of it's just the circumstances that they're around. It feels like they're still in year one of the rebuild. It feels like they're still digging themselves deeper and building. It almost feels like they're extending this rebuild to take even longer now, because now you're loading up more on draft picks, and it's like, okay, but it's going to take year 2, year 3 before those guys are hitting their strides, and it's just like,
are you suggesting this was a ploy for job stability?
I'm not suggesting any of that. I'm just saying, like,
I'm just joking.
It feels like we keep kicking the can further and further down the line. And listen, I'm the one that I'm not necessarily even against this trade. It's just, it's frustrating to see it take longer and longer. And I mean, this team is not going to be any better because of this trade until 2-3 years down the line, right?
I don't know. That's not necessarily true, because when this spot where they pick, you can get a guy that can come in and make an impact, right? Like, you're getting a guy that's going to be picked in the late 50s, early 60s, probably, if the Vikings keep pace from what they are, but who knows if they're going to be able to, right? And those level of guys, like, think of the impact that Josh Pascal had when he came back. Like, he completely changed that front, and that's game. No, I understand, but like he also changes it for last week too. I mean, like, you can't do some of the things. It could have been worse. They might not even been close if you don't have Josh Pascal in that last game. So you can get a guy that can come in. Let's say they're looking for a right guard. It's possible they're looking for. You can get a starting right guard at that spot. You can get. I know how you feel about running backs. You can get a starting running back at this spot. You can get a starting guard at this spot. You can get a starting tight end at this spot. Hey, you're going to need one of those now.
Hey, and so maybe you traded Hockenson for a Hawkinson? Great.
Well, but at a lower cost,
one,
right? Yeah, exactly. You can get corners at this spot. Like, you're not going to be able to fix all your problems with your 2 first-round picks. You're going to fix 2 problems with your first 2, right? And so you have to look at where the draft is deep, where the spots are, and who else you can get. Odds are you're probably going to get a guy who is going to be more of like a specialist in year 1, and then maybe develop into a starter, like you said, in year 2. There is going to be that time wait, right? Like I completely accept that. But like, did you watch the Buffalo game the other night?
Yeah, a little bit.
Right. Okay. Like James Cook, their running back. You see how they kind of used him as a specialist type of option, right? Like, he was picked 63rd, right? So and I think the Vikings pick right now is 62. But I think that's going to drop into the 50s. But you could get that. You could, like, Trey McBride was the first tight end taken last year. He went in the late 50s, right? And so, like, it's a deep tight end class. You're going to have a chance. You could have a chance to land a guy who's going to be your day one starter, and maybe he's a better blocker, but not as dynamic as a pass catcher. But again, for what this coaching staff is looking for, I think that's more suited for what it is. So there's a lot of different ways you could add to the defensive line. You could get defensive tackles at these spots, right? So
Sure.
and that's just, I mean, you have 5 picks now in the top 65 currently, right? Because they're at that one spot each round.
Yes.
But it really just depends, right? Like there's a bunch of different positions that I think are going to fall from a value standpoint into that range where you're going to get a guy who can contribute. And if you're holding on to that 4th round pick, you're probably not going to get, you're going to probably get a Derek Barnes instead of an Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? We agree with that? Like
Well,
that's the chances,
yeah,
right?
but I mean, I'm
But
on
my
right.
point is,
Sure.
if you have a chance, if you're at a spot where you're picking a guy who you think you're going to get at like a Derek Barnes type level, and you have a chance to get a guy who is going to be a contributor and potential starter, that's essentially what you're doing here, right? You're shedding cap. You're shedding 2 million in cap this year. 9.4 is a massive number to shed next year because that's going to be really important for how they want to approach it. I mean, they were a little bit tighter than I was, hoping they would be. That extra 9, that's a massive number to me.
That's maybe, it almost feels like that's more important than some of these draft picks, since again, it's not really gaining draft picks.
No, but I do
picks.
think but improving that one draft pick and freeing up a lot of capital, that's about the best the best outcome you could expect in any type of trade that they were going to get this year. So yeah, it stinks he's going to a rival. He's probably going to have 100 yards in a touchdown when they face the Vikings this year. I mean, like
Right.
that's just how karma works, right?
Yeah.
But this is basically in line or close to in line from what I was expecting from a deal. I never thought getting a 2nd rounder straight up was realistic. If you upgrade a day 3 pick to a top 60 pick, it's probably worth it.
So I ran a poll here in our live Twitch audience, and it looked like just over half of people give this trade a B, and I'm not going to give it a grade yet, and I think I still need some time to sit on it, but I think a fair question that people are asking right now is, were the Lions using TJ Hawkinson? And you said it yourself, they might want something different out of their tight ends, but I guess the question is, should they? One thing we've said about this regime all the time is they kind of cater their offense or their defense to their offensive talent. So is it fair to criticize the coaching staff for saying, hey, you guys weren't using TJ Hockenson right, so now you are getting lesser or equal value to a talented player that you could have used, but you weren't using correctly?
I think it comes down to the philosophical usage. Like they had a philosophy on how they wanted to use their players, and the tight end position just wasn't as valuable to them. Now, could you say that they underutilized him? Sure. I think he goes to another team. Like, and if the Vikings want to prioritize him a little bit better, yeah. But I mean, even with the Vikings, I mean, he's still probably 3rd at best in their pecking order, right? Maybe even lower, right? Because they've got Jefferson.
Receiving.
Got,
okay, I
right.
thought you meant
Receiving.
Yeah.
Like he's still not going to be the guy like that's going to go out there and be, he's not going to be your George Kittle, who's your second option, right? I mean, he's not. But if you utilize him as a pass catcher and you're putting him out there and you're trying to create mismatches, absolutely you can use him better. He just was not part of the tight end position, is just not part of their offensive philosophy on how they want to approach. It wasn't with Lynn. It's not with Johnson. And I do think that that's probably an overarching Campbell ideology, right? Like, I mean, if you're going to have that, because he's a good enough player that for 2 offensive coordinators not to prioritize him is a little surprising. Think about the fact when we watched the Patricia camps, the training camps, he was dominated in training camp, right?
Like they featured him too, and then this year it seemed to fall out.
Okay, right, yeah, 2020, yes. This previous training camp, he seemed kind of absent, and maybe the year before he was more dominating because their wide receiver room was had a Perryman
Right.
as one of the starters,
Right.
right? So, yes, I think it's fair to say he wasn't being utilized properly, but I also don't think he was ever going to be utilized properly, uh, or to his full potential as like a mismatch. They want that role to do different things, and therefore he wasn't as good of a fit. It's something we've been talking about for a while. It's not like I know some people are surprised by this, and I know some people are going to kind of push back against me saying this, but this has been something we've talked about previously, is that he doesn't seem to fit what they want to do moving forward.
Yeah. And I think that does, it brings questions of whether the Lions' route forward is the correct one. I've always been kind of a proponent of building more around the pass game than the run game, and it's clear that this coaching staff has that reversed mostly.
Oh,
They've invested in some outside receivers and things like that for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
a 12th overall pick, right?
but
So,
but sending away T.J. Hockenson also sends a different
mm-hmm.
message, and maybe it's just that we trust Amon-Ra to be our up the middle guy, but maybe it's that they have faith in James Mitchell. Maybe it's that they really like what Brock Wright does. But the Lions undoubtedly got worse and dealt a talented player in this draft in this trade, and so I don't know. I'm at a very mixed emotion kind of feeling right now. I understand it though.
He's going to be billed, and all the headlines are going to say top 10 tight end
Right.
traded, because statistically, as a pass catcher, he is
Right.
he's that's what he produces at that level. And of course, a couple of games have skewed that, as you wrote the other day, in when we wrote the 5 options that might be traded.
Right.
It he will put up offensive numbers.
Yeah.
But again, when he doesn't fit into the vision, it's surprising. It's not surprising to see them, interested in fielding calls for him. And so I'm a little surprised. I'm not overly surprised. I think they actually might have got a little bit more than what I had thought. And I know that it's the argument against they didn't acquire more picks, they just upgraded. That's a very valid. For me, upgrading that pick is it could be a potential difference maker, because you're talking about what could be like 40, 50 spots when it's all said and done. And when you're moving from like a top 100 to a top 50 or in the 50s, you get a different level of player, and that's really what they need. They need a different level of player, as opposed to like just bodies. More average players.
Right.